Hi everyone, good evening. I hope you're enjoying your evening so far. Welcome to our webinar about rewilding urban gardens. Today we have two wonderful speakers. We have Deena Joy Kestenbaum and we have Alison Sharpe. And without much ado, I will hand it over to you, Deena.
Thank you so much, Shiri. Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome. I'm so glad that so many people have decided that this is an interesting enough topic to give up an hour on a Thursday evening. And the topic is rewilding your garden or letting go of control a bit, which for some of us, I think is not simple in the garden. So, when we're talking about rewilding, what does that actually mean? And there is maybe a misconception that rewilding or wilding, that word suggests kind of unkempt, jungle-like, unmaintained. It really doesn't mean just doing nothing and letting nature take over completely, because you will then get the more dominant plants, which generally in a garden will be nettles and brambles, um, that will just take over like thugs. So it is not just lying down on your kitchen floor, looking out of the window and wondering why your garden has been taken over by nettles and brambles. But what it does mean is kind of stepping back from a very regimented schedule that perhaps some of us have inherited from parents, or there is sometimes a sense that the kind of order that you want your inside to be is sometimes taken to the outside as well, so that the outside and the inside both look very neat and tidy. So, what rewilding does mean is allowing natural processes a little bit more room to do what it does. And that's kind of unpredictable sometimes, which makes it really interesting that you can get um, plants which some people might regard as weeds, um, self-seeded plants. In other words, things that have not popped up in your garden due to human intervention, but have arrived there either because the seeds have been wind dispersed, or they've been pooed out by birds, or by passing foxes, dropped out of the mouths of seeds, dropping out of the mouths of birds as they pass over your garden. It's kind of interesting if you can let go of control a bit. So this letting go of control a bit will bring biodiversity into your garden. And so lying down on your kitchen floor will certainly not enhance nature. Doing less will make your garden a far more interesting space, so that when you do have a small collapse onto your kitchen floor, if you've got windows going out into your garden, you're going to get a better view, a more interesting view. So,
Um,
rewilding, let
just
me,
sorry, Deena, are you able to maybe share?
is loosening control a little bit of your garden, not necessarily of your home, um, and seeing what comes in. Right, the bit out. So why does rewilding matter? And it really does matter. You might think, look, I've just got a small garden. It's, a meter by 2 meters. What difference does it make? Let's have a look and see what's happened to biodiversity in this country in the last decades, and prepare to be really shocked. And then we will talk about why it is so important. So the UK, which probably we don't pick up living in the borough of Barnet, which is actually pretty green, but it is one of the most nature depleted countries in the developed world. Most European countries will have somewhere between 31 to 50% forest cover. I mean, 50% of Poland, 50% of many of the Eastern European countries are forested. The UK, shockingly, has got around 13%. And the result of such an erosion of forest cover, tree cover, is that bird numbers have plummeted. Um, that goes the same with insect numbers, pollinators. The numbers are somewhere close to 58%, which is which is horrible to contemplate. And we're talking about from the 60s onward. We're not talking about hundreds of years. We're talking about in most of our lifetimes. I mean, if anybody here was born in the 70s, then it will seem like ancient history. But for me, born in the 50s, it seems in touching distance. So one in six species, whether it's animals or insects, amphibians, fish, are in risk of extinction, and over half of flowering plant species have decreased. So this is actually quite a depressing takeaway of the state of biodiversity in the UK as a whole. The other thing to think about in no small measure is climate change. And again, scientists were talking about climate change decades ago, but we are now living through the manifestation of what scientists were predicting and were poo-pooed or ignored, or you just hope for the best that it won't happen. It is happening, and we are experiencing it in London right now in the sense that we have had super weird weather, no rainfall. Yesterday was the first serious rainfall in weeks and weeks and weeks. If you go outside and have a look at the ground, it is like the image in the picture, dry and cracked. And this means that when we do get floods, which is what's happening now, we go from drought to flood, is that the ground, the earth is so parched and it's capped over the top so that the rainwater doesn't really manage to infiltrate into the soil and into the plant roots. It kind of bounces off. And this affects the viability really of the traditional suburban or cottage garden that in the UK was predicated on there just being endless amounts of water to water plants. And there needs to be serious adaptations of how we go about planting. That's actually a whole different subject that maybe one day I will go into in that how do you actually design and plant up a garden that will cope with these extremes of weather conditions. Um, but I don't want to leave you in a state of doom and gloom. And this is where each of us with a garden, each of us with a balcony, each of us with a windowsill next to a window that opens can make a small incremental dent in what is nationally very bad news indeed. So 25.8 million gardens in the UK. The UK is a nation of plants people who love gardens. So that is 4.6% of the UK's total land area is people's backyards. And that is amazingly three times the size of the UK's nature reserves in total. And if you look at the numbers of nature reserves that are in striking distance from London, there are a lot. And in these gardens, we collectively are supporting a huge number of butterflies, of reptiles, of amphibians, of birds, of animals, mammals. Um, I mean, I know many people might consider foxes to be kind of a pest, but they are, all of these things are important in the entire ecosystem and in the food system also that keeps everything in balance and keeps nature in check using natural methods of predation. So cumulatively, the smallest changes that we make to our gardens, 28.5.8 million gardens, each of us makes a little difference, or even half of us makes a little difference. In total, that is quite an impact. So let's talk a little bit about what is the problem with the typical suburban garden. And the image that you see here, this is from a park. I mean, it's clearly a park design. But when I talk about a suburban garden, that really often applies to quite a traditional approach to parks as well, where the wastage in the amount of bedding plants, annuals, in other words, plants whose entire life cycle occupies spring and summer, then it dies, never to be seen again. So I don't know if you've noticed in parks at the end of spring, two or three times in the summer, grounds people are just ripping out everything that's dead and throwing it away. In order also to maintain something that looks like this with super green grass, not a daisy or a dandelion on it, a very uniform display of marigolds. I mean, without reading anything about this, there is no doubt that herbicides are used, pesticides are used. You can't get this very neat, very controlled effect without a lot of chemical intervention. And the result of that is again poisoning of biodiversity. So if we think about the issues in our own backyards, um, what I didn't put in here actually, and is a real issue, is this recent well, I've become aware of it, I guess, in the last 10 years, the popularity of fake grass, of astroturf. And the problem with that is that, first of all, it kills all of the microorganisms that are under this plastic sheeting. Um, it is made with a lot of toxins. It also, quite disturbingly, releases a lot of toxins as it gets very hot. It's made of plastic, polyurethane, and of course, it doesn't allow for any kind of life, except for human life, to participate in it. Um, so that I mean, if this is what you somebody is wanting, there's not much of a conversation to be had. My next door neighbors have it, and every time I look out of the window, it looks exactly the way I was mentioning in the beginning. It looks like the extension of their living room, but that's what suits them. And, there's nothing much one can say about this without becoming slightly obnoxious. Um, so think about what is the proportion of mowed lawn to the rest of your garden. Now, it is definitely true that when you've got younger children, a, an area, expanse of grass is terrific for them to play on, to have football, to put a trampoline on, to play cricket. I cannot begin to tell you how many windows were broken in the back of my house whilst enabling my children to have a wonderful time outside. And actually, as they got older and older, I took away more and more grass until there was hardly any left at all. Um, a very closely mowed lawn using chemicals to eradicate pests, what is perceived to be pests, to create this uniform look again with nothing else but grass species there. That again is their chemical use there. Um, you're not there is a tendency, and I think that beginning of spring, everybody is just so starved of color and needs to get planting outside. You go to the garden center and you're attracted to the brightest colors. Plant breeders are quite exceptional in creating flowers with stripes and dots and frills around the edge and all kinds of remarkable patterning. I mean, some of it looks like fabric, it's so extraordinary. But in order to get that level of cultivation, it is actually completely pollen dead. There is no pollen, there's no nectar in there at all. So the result is that it's not going to self-seed. The pollen that is in a flower carries the male DNA. So no pollen, no male DNA, no fertilization, reproduction, no next generation. Additionally, it is both the pollen and the nectar that provides nutrients for tremendous numbers of insects. So if you've got this really beautiful, like Alice in Wonderland, Queen of Hearts garden, but if you think about the Queen of Hearts garden, actually all the roses that should have been red were white, so they were painted. Just it's just a canvas to look at. It's in terms of fostering nature, it doesn't do anything. Um, and too many plants need a lot of watering. And this is, again, going back to what I was saying earlier, this is something that we as collectively need to think more about in terms of what kind of plants and plant combinations can sustain periods of drought without too much watering. And so this really does change quite dramatically what we always have considered to be the Gertrude Jekyll type of typical country garden. It's not sustainable anymore. And if anybody wants to take a day trip, I would highly recommend to take a trip to the Beth Chatto Gardens in Essex that Beth Chatto herself established, I think in the 80s, maybe even earlier. She was really avant-garde. It is a drought garden. And plants that were chosen to be put into the ground there were watered once when they were put in, and that's it. And they had to just manage themselves. And it is a really interesting paradigm on how to create a garden that's visually beautiful and quite self-sustaining. And the other thing, and again, this doesn't suit every household, is that by hermetically sealing your garden, if you are lucky enough to be living in an area, and I know that areas in High Barnet certainly do have hedgehog populations, hedgehogs actually roam across a lot of acreage. And there is a movement to try and raise awareness for people to put a little hole at the base of their fences to allow a kind of hedgehog highway. Another area where there is a rather great abundance of hedgehogs is Hampstead Garden suburb, because not only do you have the heath right there, but the suburb trust protocol doesn't permit fences. You have to have hedge boundaries. So it's an open boundary. I mean, it does mean that you leave. I used to live in the suburb many years ago, and my dogs would end up in, gardens like 20 houses away. It is a good way of making friends with your neighbors, though. So if it's possible, that is something to think about. So let's talk a little bit more about why a super neat, chemically maintained garden is a problem. We did talk already about dwindling insect populations, the lack of fertilization, so that your plant stock is reduced. You've got lower rates of food production. I mean, if anybody who is growing vegetables, even if you just have a fruit tree in your garden, you need insects to be pollinating that. So if you're hoping for apples or plums, cherries in a backyard, you are dependent on pollinators, pollinating insects. And if you're going to be using chemicals, you will not get those pollinating insects. It depletes the entire biome, the entire ecosystem. The other interesting thing is, and this is a change that the RHS started to trumpet again about a decade ago, is to move away from this age-old kind of puritanical view that twice a year you have to dig practically down to the earth's core and turn over all of the soil and eradicate everything that's in the soil in order to clean it for sowing and planting. And actually, research has shown that this really is a disaster for the ecosystem that's in the soil, that in every handful of soil that you pick up of earth, they are literally, it is teeming, they are literally millions of microscopic organisms that are living in a community, a sort of hierarchical community, so that the smaller ones are constantly the food source for larger ones, ending up with the biggest, which, well, we are, the super predators, but birds and mammals, badgers, foxes. Um, so disturbing the soil structure is really not good for soil health and therefore not good for plant health, resulting in having to add fertilizers and often chemical fertilizers to the soil. And those chemical fertilizers, the wash off that goes into drainage system also is a catastrophe for waterways. And with all of that, very manicured garden gives very little shelter for wildlife, for overwintering insects, and for amphibians to hide in during the winter. So, what is required? And it's not easy. I'm not saying that it's easy or simple at all. We need to start thinking about how to change our approach to our backyard, to engage in a mindset shift. And how do we affect that? I think one of the ways, and there's a lot of writing and talk amongst naturalists about this, is just to be feel more at one with the outside world. Just spend time outside, look, listen, take a moment. I'm not saying, spend half an hour paralyzed out there. Spend 90 seconds outside looking at a flower, at a plant. Find interest in it. We need to reinvent ourselves as an active partner in the ecosystem. It's not us, the dominators and the outside that we bring under our control. And very small changes, as I keep reiterating, will have incremental effects on water conservation, on the health of wildlife, on air quality. So with some small calibrations, our outside spaces really can become an oasis of resilience in our local neighborhood to climate breakdown. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to stop seas rising in Bangladesh, but it will make a small difference in your own neighborhood. So, what we're talking about is establishing a mini ecosystem. If you can do it in your own garden, chat to some of your neighbors, get engaged with what the Finchley Pollinator project is doing, that will enable you to start really making connections with your neighborhood, with the outside space, with nature, and then really start to notice what birds are flying over, what birds are sitting in your trees, what bugs are on your plants. And then you can get these fantastic apps on your phone that will identify everything for you. And it becomes quite obsessional, actually. And you can tell that I spend a great deal of time doing exactly that. My partner and I went on a road trip to the west coast of Ireland last year in May, and every photograph he has of me is me bending down over a plant or onto the ground with my phone, taking a photograph on, like, insect identification, plant identification. quite fabulous. So, when you are thinking about a garden, and the image that we have here is everything that goes contrary to rewilding a garden, closely mowed grass, very, very few plants, very, very highly designed, and actually no flowers at all. So, a few of the things that may not be too difficult to implement are mowing the grass less, allowing dandelions and vetch and yarrow and all these kind of flowers that will pop up in your grass if you allow it. This is where the mindset shift changes. Instead of thinking, oh my God, my grass has been infiltrated by weeds, it's actually, this is really beautiful. It creates more color, it creates a kind of tapestry, it's got more visual interest in shape, in form, in texture. Absolutely do not use chemicals outside. Um, in a well-balanced space outside, if we, with time, you should get a manageable biological pest control where you have enough ladybirds who eat tens of thousands of aphids, of green fly and black fly. Um, don't spray them with chemicals because you'll kill off everything else. Now, the other thing is that there's nothing wrong with having exotic plants and some highly bred plants in your garden. I mean, we don't need to be too puritanical about this, but just think about what the ratio is between pollen rich, nectar rich plants. And if you go to garden centers, you don't need to be a horticulturalist to know what that is because most plants have signs with a little bee on it that will tell you that it's pollinator friendly. And the other thing is, think about trying to get as long a flowering period as possible, starting with snowdrops around, January, February, all the way through to late autumn, where you've got ivy that's flowering that becomes um, a kind of mecca for late pollinators, particularly wasps. So that if you have some ivy in your garden, don't hack it back. It's really great for animal habitat and for feeding hungry pollinators in September, October. I would suggest think about how much paving you're going to put into your garden. Please do not use fake grass. Um, and allow it to be less tidy. In other words, the takeaway is just do less. Do less. Less is definitely more. And here is some images and lists of lovely things to add into your garden. I mean, this image here is a very, very sophisticated or quite sophisticated looking water feature. But actually, if you look at the edge, you can see that it's a prefabricated pond that you can buy or send off for, it can be delivered to your door. And has just been dug into the ground and very, very cleverly planted together with stones and rocks at the top. You will be amazed what happens when you even introduce a bucket of water with perhaps a couple of aquatic plants in it. You'll start to see really interesting insects, water boatmen, all sorts of interesting things on the surface of the water, damselfly, dragonfly. Um, I mean, if you ever have the privilege of watching dragonfly mate, honestly, it is a thing of beauty. Um, Let perhaps areas of your grass grow longer. I completely get it that you don't want your whole lawn, kind of knee high. But if you can find a corner that you could let just grow, see what's there. It can be really interesting. And then really take a look at the kind of species of flower of plant that's growing up with the grass and what kinds of insects that is attracting. Leaf piles, as you can see, top right, that's terrific for overwintering insects. Wood piles, again, it can just be put, sort of neatly at the back of the garden so that it looks sort of naturally untidy, but it's actually managed, It's not just dumped, but it's artfully arranged. And again, there are all kinds of beetles, stag beetles, insects, carpenter bees that will so appreciate having some wood in your garden. Um, and as I said, have a long flowering period of time. Most, not all garden centres, but a lot of the local ones around Finchley, and there is a terrific one, and I don't work for them, so this is not a professional plug. Clock House Nurseries in Enfield. The staff there are very knowledgeable. So, don't feel shy to go in and say, listen, I want to plant an area in my garden and I want it to look interesting from March all the way through till October, and I want it to attract a lot of insects. And these are the colors I like. And, good, well-trained members of staff can really help you there. And don't be shy to ask. You'll make their day. These two websites are really good to jot down if you've got a pen and paper because they will give you step-by-step instructions of how to put a mini wildlife pond into your garden. And it's really not super difficult. And if you don't want to dig, get somebody else to dig. This is why it's good to be friendly with neighbors, because maybe neighbors has a 15-year-old son who would be delighted to dig for a few pounds. Um, and at the top, it shows you how you can make a little gap in your fence and allow a passageway through. Maybe nothing will go through, and maybe you'll get your neighbor's Jack Russell coming through. But again, that will enable you to make friends with your neighbor and the Jack Russell. So these are just a few examples of native species. You've got hollyhocks here to the right. Hollyhocks, interestingly, are biennials. That means that their life cycle is 2 years. The first year they will put up a rosette of leaves, and the second year they flower. Then they die back, but they are prolific self-seeders. We've got scabious at the top, the purple, and very prolific self-seeding red campion, which always amuses me because actually it's pink. Um, Oxeye daisies are coming into flower now, knapweed. I mean, the list is endless. And the joyous thing now is ChatGPT will just give you lists of native species of both perennials, self-seeding plants, native shrubs. We have got the Gelder rose on your right in the white flower, that's showing you what it will look like in the summer. And then the red berries are what it looks like in the autumn. And you can see that the leaves are beginning to turn red. So that, for example, is a very long flowering, very beneficial plant because it's got the birds absolutely love the berries. And then the image at the bottom is blackthorn, which is the earliest flowering British native species that you see here. And when you walk through the park, let's say early March or end of February, you see this white flower blooming. That is blackthorn. Spring has arrived. And again, a nice thing to do instead of fencing, perhaps in the front or a brick wall, is to do a shrub, like run a line of native shrubs to create a wildlife hedging. And it's just, endlessly interesting in terms of flowers and berries and attracts a lot of birds and insects. And it's just beautiful and much softer, visually also much softer than a wall or a fence. The other thing to consider, and this is really serious now, is water conservation. Our springs and summers have become ever drier, really critical to be saving as much water as you can. You have a picture there of a water butt that's really easy to attach to a downpipe. So to collect whatever water that's being used, that's falling down from the skies. I mean, the other thing to consider, and this is definitely something that is very common, sort of second nature to people living in very hot climates, is using what's called grey water. So if you're washing up, you wash up in a bowl and you throw that water out onto the ground, onto your flower beds. Um, there are people I know who have had drainage organized so that the bath water will come out into water butts, and you use that grey water as well. Something that I read very recently that I've included here as a way of using less water in really hot period of time is to paint the inside of terracotta pots, which are porous and therefore dry out really fast, with waterproof paint, stand them in sources of water, and that will enable the roots to take up water from below, and the water isn't evaporating out of the porous material of the terracotta. And that's something I'm definitely going to be trying this summer, and I can report back. Another important way of reducing water loss around plants is to put down mulch. Great word, that mulch. And mulch means a kind of blanket of shredded up, chopped up. It can be anything organic like wood chip, leaf mold will work very well, compost. You want to do it to a depth of about 4 centimeters. I mean, that's about this much. It's quite deep. And that again will prevent water loss. Mulching is really good also to do at the end of the growing season because it keeps the soil warm, a little bit warmer through the winter and will allow for slightly earlier germination. So that is good practice. And then composting. Now, composting actually, I'm just mindful of the time here. This is a whole art form in and of itself, and I have to admit to you that it took me some years to actually get it, to actually end up with crumbly, what's called humus, as opposed to hummus, full of nutrients that is just made out of your kitchen waste. I mean, no dairy, no meat, no animal products in there, but coffee and tea grounds and eggshells and bread and all of your chopped up green waste. Don't put in roots, don't put in seed heads. And layer, basically, you want a green layer, then a brown layer, then a green layer. So green, as I say, is kitchen waste and plant material. Brown is newspapers, cardboard. Um, I'm not going to go into it in great detail because we're running out of time. And as I say, that really is a whole subject in and of itself. But do try it. And compost bins can be made very simply. There are instructions online out of pallets that you see lying around all over the place. And then you've got your own homemade compost that you can use as a mulch. So you're creating this kind of circular economy in a way, um, wasting very little that you're producing and creating a really healthy space outside. Now, another interesting thing to do in your garden, if you're thinking about adding plants or starting again completely, is layering so that you have got different heights in your garden. I mean, aesthetically, it does create quite it creates a lot of visual interest. Um, But it really does add to the biodiversity of your garden. It creates little microclimates so that the ground cover will keep your soil cool and moist. There's very little space there for unwanted plants. Um, Trees and shrubs provide homes for birds as well as numerous insects, amphibians and hedgehogs and all kinds of insects will hide in dense ground cover. There are lots of different sorts of plants that have hollow stems where insects will overwinter. And actually, this image here, I mean, it looks really beautiful, and every plant in it, I'm just looking, I think almost everything here is British native and can be gotten at your local garden center without any difficult at all. There's nothing here that is exotic or unusual, but it is combined really artfully. And again, you can do this. It is possible to do. So the outcome of, sorry? The outcome of rewilding is you're going to get a much healthier soil. You will get an entire ecosystem of biological control with ladybirds eating aphids and frogs eating slugs, birds eating slugs and snails, much more um, evidence of pollinating insects. And the garden becomes vibrant, it becomes a living space. So, what are the takeaways from here? Just do less. Less pruning, less tidying, less throwing away, less mowing, just less intervention. You allow plants to complete their life cycles so that you've got seed heads that provide late seasonal food for birds. So, for example, here we've got teasels that are absolutely adored by the chaffinch family. These teasels, when they go to seed, just attract a host of finches. And Shiri, I think you had that experience last year, didn't you, with teasels that you planted? Um, you will see all kinds of insects, and the whole ecosystem is then supported. Healthy soil, healthy plants, insects that pollinate, birds that are part of the bigger food chain. And this is how you can incrementally create a micro ecosystem in your own backyard, um, which I don't think is impossible to do. I hope it's not impossible to do. I hope that you were able to take away something from this and think, you know what, I could do that outside. And over the years, maybe you can um, introduce more and more of what I have been suggesting or become interested more and more. And then your reading or stuff that you watch on TV might take you to places that at this point you really wouldn't have thought about. So thank you so much. And over to you, Shiri.
Thank you so much, Dina. This has been absolutely fantastic and really fascinating, especially just thinking that there's not much we need to do and we can give up control a little bit and take a lot of interest in our garden. Before we open up for a Q&A, we do have another part to our presentation. But in the meantime, also do feel free to write down your questions in the chat and still keep your mics muted, please. So today's webinar is actually part of a big project that we at the Finchley Pollinator Projects are working on, which is part of the borough-wide Light and Flight project, which is a heritage initiative. And our part is all about telling the stories of local community gardens, as well as just historical paths that were in Finchley. As part of that, we have a member of our steering committee, Alison, who is doing lots of different things, including upcycling artists, and she's also an archivist in the Finchley Society. And she'll take us through a brief history of Finchley's open spaces. So over to you, Alison.
Thank you, Sherry. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
Lovely. And you've stolen my introduction, so I'll move straight on. So we are in a really fortunate position in Finchley in that we have an amazing array of open spaces, as Deena alluded to earlier. So I'm just going to give you a very brief history as to how they came about. Now, originally Finchley was just a clearing in the wood, which is where the name comes from. And we know that from the 12th century, Finchley Manor, which you can see down at the bottom, underlined in green here, hopefully you can see where I'm pointing. So that was the manor house for Finchley, and around that, a small hamlet grew up. And then also we know existed in Church End was the beautiful church of St Mary at Finchley. So you probably, hopefully, if you're local, you'll know that church. So they're doing some great historical tours over the next month. So do go along and find out about it. So it started off just with those tiny hamlets, and the bulk of the rest of the area of Finchley was a woodland, and it was used in Tudor times as a royal hunting ground. So hopefully you can imagine all those lords and ladies trampling through, doing their hunting. Now, the Bishop of London was one of the lords of the manor, and he sold a lot of the wood from the wood, so particularly oak, and a lot of that went into central London for the big building projects. So you imagine around those times, Tower of London, St Paul's Cathedral. So a lot of the major buildings that we think of in Finchley were, in the centre of London, in the city, were built using Finchley oak. And it's often mentioned if you do tours of those sorts of buildings. He also sold off a lot of the trees for firewood, so in order to make money. And so both of those things led to Finchley Wood becoming Finchley Common. So far fewer trees, much more grassland, and an open area. Um, Now, as you can see, hopefully on the map, you can see that there is a main turnpike road. So this is the Great North Road, which ran from the city all the way up through the north. And so it was a major route that people wanted to travel. But because they had to travel across the common, it caused lots of problems. So hopefully you've heard of some famous highwaymen who were around this area. So in East Finchley, there used to be an oak tree called the Turpin's Oak, and that supposedly was where Dick Turpin hid to get away from the soldiers. Sadly, it's no longer with us. And so, because of all the issues with the common, the government decided that they needed to solve that problem. And so they enclosed the common and shared out the land between the landowners, the current landowners. And so it was chopped up into what were called forgotten what they're called. Anyway, it was chopped up into small sections in 1816 and the land shared. Fortunately, there were small pockets of land that were retained to support local people, poor local people, so where they could still allow their animals to graze and where they could collect firewood from. But the majority of it went to the landowners. Now, if you'd like to find out more about that, when Sherry sends out the slides at the bottom here, there are a couple of links to some really nice presentations and films, which will give you a bit more of that history. So moving on, you'll see again over this side the same map and comparing it with a much more modern map. And this is how what we see today really developed. So by 1800, this is what Finchley looked like on the left. And then the enclosure meant it was chopped up into the smaller spaces. And because the major roads were then turned into turnpikes, where the people travelling had to pay to use them, which is why we've got some toll buildings around, Then they became more formalised. People wanted to stop en route, and that's how gradually we ended up with our small villages and then town centres. Now, if you look closely, you'll see that the names are a little different on the 1800 map. So we have Church End, we have East End, and we have Whetstone. And North Finchley doesn't yet exist. And you'll see that Fry and Barnet has a lovely spelling of Friar and Barnet, which is great. Once the roads have been more formalised, those town centres started growing, and along came the railways. So the railway came through in 1867 up to what was then called Finchley and Hendon Station. It then became Church End Station, Finchley Church End, and then eventually became Finchley Central as we know it today. North Finchley appeared because of the joining of the roads. So hopefully those who know our area, you know the Tally-Ho corner and where the two main roads meet, so the Great North Road and Ballards Lane. And that's why North Finchley happened, because of course lots of people were coming through on those two main roads, so people wanted to stop off, and then nice shops started being built. And eventually, because of that, because of the introduction of the trams and then buses, and then finally the extension of the railway through on a branch line. We always think of our bit of the Northern Line as the main bit, but actually it was the branch line, and we ended up with Torrington Park Station. Anyone heard of Torrington Park Station? It's some people. So that was the original name of Woodside Park Station. And the fantastic thing about Woodside Park is that it's still got all of its original buildings. So if you'd like to see what the station looked like when it was first built in the Victorian period, go and have a look, 'cause it's beautiful. So how did that leave us then with our wonderful open spaces? And you'll see on the left here that I've marked the open spaces that we're focusing on as part of our project. So we're very fortunate in that some of these original open spaces actually have part of the original Finchley Wood and Finchley Common within them. So places like Long Lane Pasture, the Gleeblands near the Great North Leisure Park, Cherry Tree Wood, they're all leftovers, but it's a tiny, minute, as you can see, the common and the wood used to span the whole area. So we're left with this tiny sections. But fortunately, we've now also got some other wonderful things, mainly because of some locals who have given their homes and their land to the people of Finchley. So, for example, Stephen's House and Gardens, for those who know, that was owned by Inky Stevens, famous for his blue-black ink, and he very kindly gave that site to the people of Finchley, which is why we now have those amazing open spaces. So just to end on, reiterating what Deena has been saying about our pollinators, I just popped up here a little graphic to show why we need these little pockets of green. We call them buzz stops or mini meadows, so places that the bees can stop en route. So honeybees are the ones who are able to fly the furthest. They can go up to 14 kilometres, 8 miles, but that isn't very productive for them. They use more energy than they bring back. So actually, their most productive range is 3 kilometres. But the other bees that we have the most species of, the bumblebees, they like to go just about 1 kilometre, whereas the solitary bees, of which we have most species in this country, but are probably the least well known, they only go a few metres, so around 120 metres to go and fetch their pollen, and nectar. So that's why it's so important that we have all of these little pockets and spaces to drop by. So what we're hoping is that we can fill in where we have the lovely open spaces, but through all of your enthusiasm and commitment, you can provide those little stopping off points on those bee highways. So if you'd like to find out more about our light and flight, again, there's a little link here. You'll be able to click through to the website and find out more.
Fantastic. That's absolutely fascinating. Alison, thank you so much. And Alison also does tours and walks, guided walks, and that's all part of our project as well. Thank you very much. And now we can open for a few questions. I can see that Deena has been very diligent and trying already to answer some of you. That's fantastic. So can I just ask some things that haven't been answered yet? So a question from Melanie, and she's sharing about how hard rock her her soil is, and it is difficult to add flowers into that. And Deena, do you have maybe any ways that that can be maybe improved? And you are on mute. So
Yes. Yeah, my gosh, isn't that just, become the ubiquitous statement, isn't it, since lockdown? You're on mute. Um, Look, Fleur mentioned, and she's absolutely right, that there is one way of doing it that requires a lot of patience, which is adding an awful lot of leaf litter and organic matter to the surface of this very compacted soil, and then letting the weather and the microorganisms in the soil do their work by pulling it down into the soil. But I think, as Fleur, you yourself was saying, this is going to take a couple of years at least, if not longer. Another way of getting a much quicker result is that, I mean, you can't change the structure of the soil. We are on clay soil, so the particles that are made up, the atomic particles that make up this particular soil are they are very large. There's a lot of airspace. Wilf, I see that you're shaking your head. Maybe you have something else you want to add? Not atomic particles, the molecules, that's the word I'm looking for.
No clay.
Okay. So it is what it is, but you can change the texture of it by adding a lot of organic matter, compost, digging it in a bit. I wouldn't suggest doing big digging, but perhaps taking off, if you've got really compacted soil, maybe taking off just a bit of it. I mean, that is very labor intensive. So you've got two options: either labor intensive but will produce faster results, or the adding on of a lot of organic matter and then just waiting for nature to take its course. Or try, a bit of both and see, compare and contrast.
that's really great advice. It was for the first time I've actually seen also organic matter sold in garden centers, and I like this brand called Grow. What is it called? Grow something. And I was, because it's peat free and very natural, and then I opened it and I was very surprised to see worms inside a store-bought compost. I don't know. Have you ever seen something like this? Yeah, I got the thumbs up from Wilf. But yeah, I was very surprised. So I also compost, and so it's just nice that when you have that outcome, it's so rich with wildlife, and then when you put it on any sort of poor soil, it really changes it. It does take some time though. Great. So I see that Deena has answered all of the questions. So Did I miss anyone? I think there's a new question coming from Monica. How to get rid of plant pests, especially white flies and fungus gnats without using harmful chemicals? That's a whole question, a whole.
So the fungus gnats, is that in house plants? These little bugs that come from houseplant compost? I'm not entirely sure what you mean. Yes. Okay. So there in that situation, just change the compost, which for houseplants anyway, one is advised to do at least once a year. Um, they're annoying and a bit unsightly, but they don't actually damage the plant. And in terms of whitefly, there are two options. One of them is you can just wash them off with water. You don't need to use chemicals at all. You can also just wet a cloth and run that up and down stems, and that will take off all of these bugs. But madly, yeah, madly, you can actually order ladybird larvae over the internet, and they come in a little cloth bag, all the larvae that you then shake out into your garden. And as I said, the ladybirds are the most voracious predators of all these little bugs that cluster onto stems.
That's great. So we're out of time. I will share a list of different ways to sort of achieve all these little features. So on one hand, we're saying just relax and do less. But if you feel quite anxious about the state of the world and you want to add a leaf pile or a log pile, or add the hole in the fence, so we will send you a list with most of it from those two lovely websites that we've mentioned before, which the first one had a lot of real life examples from other gardeners, because the Trust for Endangered Species encourages you to, once you've done something for wildlife, to upload a picture. And that's just sometimes really nice to be a bit nosy and see what other people are doing. And it just gives you examples. And it means like you can see something that's a bit more suitable for the size of your garden, or for maybe your enhanced or lack of skills. And it's just really great. And the second one, with all the different illustrations, if you study better with pictures rather than with words, then that one is for you, because it really, each of those illustrations tell you exactly what kind of tools you might need, what kind of plants you might need, and things like that. So in one page, you get a really great idea of what you need to do, and it just makes it so much more achievable and manageable. So we'll send you that links alongside the recording and different ways to connect with us. So thank you so much for joining us today. We'd love to hear some feedback from you about today's presentation, and just keep in touch. Thank you so much to Deena. Thank you so much for Alison. We really do have a brilliant team. And saying that, I just want to thank our group members, because we've won an award from the Bee Friendly Trust. And we received this news yesterday alongside this gorgeous little trophy. And I just really want to thank our fantastic group, which includes Deena, Alison, Anthea, Teresa, Ellen, and myself. And as well as everyone in Finchley who's been joining our webinars, been gardening so hard, watering when as Deena mentioned, with climate change, it's really become a bit more challenging, I have to say. So we really have wonderful, wonderful people in Finchley, Barnet, and I'm sure in the whole of the UK, like-minded people. So thank you to all of you, and have a great evening. Take care.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Go well.